Ah yes, Stephen King. Well, he doesn't need an introduction, we all know who Stephen King is. He's the most famous, still alive American author. Which is mostly due to two things. First off, his immense output, releasing at least one novel every year, and in his heyday, like 2, 3, or even 4 books, also counting his, Richard Bachman stuff. And then besides his massive output, obviously he's also famous because of all the movie adaptations of his novels and short stories and stuff. And while he did earn the nickname the King of Horror, we all know he's more than just a horror writer. I would say he's very tame and lame compared to many other actual horror authors, but that was his thing. That's what he got famous for, because he has all these supernatural, darker themed books. Pick any example: It, Shining, Salem's Lot Carrie, especially early on in his career. But he has always gone into different genres and tried different stuff. He is a very good storyteller, not necessarily a great writer, even though he can be. And I want to talk about something that has been on my mind for a while, and that also is a topic for many King fans. His recent output. Oh my god, the drop in quality is insane, and people can argue when it started. Some will say after his near-death accident in 1999, but for me, the quality really started dropping noticeably around 2016-ish. And no, this isn't necessarily in relation to the orange in the room, even though that also didn't help. I would give 2 other reasons. Kind of 3, but 2 of them are pretty much the same. One is how long King has been writing and how much he has already written. And obviously he would get repetitive after a while. And related to that is his age, which very much shows in a lot of his writing nowadays. But then the other point would be his weird obsession with crime fiction as of lately. And I say lately, even though it has been like 10 years now. So basically that's what this video and the next ones are supposed to be about. My disappointment with modern King, I want to explore it a little bit and explain why I think he has really gone down as an author. And really I just want to shit on a couple of his books that I think are very subpar. And I think it needs to be said, because I've seen a lot of positivity for King still and for those works. So I would like to balance things out a little bit and explain why those books failed for me. And this is about his, for whatever fucking reason, ever-expanding Holly Gibney Saga, which I think is fair to say at this point is his most controversial character, or just like thing he has written. This is a series of crime novels, all of them starring the character Holly Gibney, and there are 8 of these fucking books. Technically it's 7 and a short novel, aka a novella, but this still counts. And there is another book on the way, which King has already announced at the time of recording this. And I think I'm gonna split this up into the different eras, which means we're gonna start with the trilogy that completely grew out of control. Alright, so let's go. The Bill Hodges trilogy consists of the novels Mr. Mercedes, released in 2014, Finders Keepers, from 2015, and End of Watch, which was released 2016. So every year he had one of those crime novels, and there were also in every year another novel. Like Mr. Mercedes, there was also Revival in 2014, and in 2015 we didn't just get Finders Keepers, but also his short story collection Bazaar of Bad Dreams, so it was balanced out. You know, this new type of genre for King with his more typical stuff. So let's talk about what the fuck this trilogy even is and how it came to be, because this is one of the more interesting backstories for a Stephen King anything. So King started writing a short story, which was supposed to be about a retired detective character getting a message from a serial killer, mass murderer that he didn't catch during his time as an active, police detective. And the killer is taunting him, and they get into like this cat and mouse game over the internet. And this is a very solid, fun concept that exploded from a short story into a novel, Mr. Mercedes. So far, so good. Then it further exploded when King got stuck in another book he was writing called Finders Keepers, which was about the relationship between obsessive readers and authors. And because he got stuck there, he decided to throw in the detective character and some of his sidekicks from Mr. Mercedes, which allowed him to progress and finish the book. And so he decided, you know what, I'm gonna make this a trilogy. Because then he had an idea for a third book, which that is the most interesting one we're gonna get to. So yes, a simple, nice idea for a short story, expanded into a full novel, expanded into a trilogy because he got stuck with an unrelated book. Which I just want to clarify, I don't know if this is 100% true, I don't remember if King said that directly himself in an interview or such. But it's just reading Finders Keepers, you very much will get that feeling that it's an unrelated book that got shoehorned into this. So let's begin with the first book, Mr. Mercedes. First off, it should be stated that King has already tried writing crime stuff. And when I say crime stuff, or thrillers, I mean a detective, a police guy, some kind of law enforcement, a private eye, whatever, investigating some kind of crime. That's the general idea, what I consider crime or thrillers. And obviously that being like the main thing in the book, which we had already, something like The Dark Half, or the sequel to The Talisman, Black House with Peter Straub. Difference is, those previous books had supernatural elements in them, and they weren't really crime novels or thrillers in the traditional sense. They were supernatural stories first and foremost, which also helped excusing King's inability to write competent police or detective work. I mean, I'm not gonna complain about a crime novel being badly written, like the detective's conclusions and stuff not making sense when the criminal, the antagonist in question is a supernatural being. Like, that's fine, that's okay. Mr. Mercedes was different and exceptional because it was completely grounded in reality. That's gonna change very quickly, but Mr. Mercedes, I would say, is the best of this Holly Gibney Saga because it was the first attempt, so it gets a little bonus because King is going out of his comfort zone, he's trying something different, which is respectable, and he kind of succeeds. In the sense that King, even though when he's bad, he can still be entertaining. Like, he has a very simple and easy to get into writing style. That's also a reason why he's so successful, because any Joe Schmo can pick up his books and read it. It's not very literary or challenging at all, and that's not a complaint. Like King himself said, he's the equivalent of McDonald's. And that's good. The only expectations I have with Stephen King books is give me an interesting story and keep me entertained throughout. And I think that's a very simple request that I have with each book. Just entertain me and be well enough written and constructed as a story. And I would say Mr. Mercedes is well constructed in the sense that, yeah, it is a thriller. You can follow the story and the characters and stuff easily enough, and this also leads to a problem because this book is kind of easily predictable if you have any experience with like crime novels or thrillers. Because King is using every cliche in the history of crime stories in this book. Some of it works, like the main character Bill Hodges being a technically very cliched character. He's this retired detective, he's overweight and not in great shape, and he's kind of suicidal at this point because he just has nothing left to live for after being done with being a cop. But then he gets back into action because the killer from a massacre who Hodges couldn't catch during his time as a police guy, he gets into contact with Hodges and he's taunting him because he just wants to get a kick out of getting Hodges to kill himself. And we go from there because this bad guy has another big attack planned. That is the gist of it. And we actually start with the strongest chapter in the book, which is the actual Mercedes massacre, which is the killer Brady Hartsfield driving a stolen Mercedes into a crowd of people in front of a job center and killing a bunch of them and getting away. And he was wearing a Pennywise the Clown mask because Stephen King references himself a lot. This chapter is actually very fun and very suspenseful because we see it from the perspective of just a regular guy who's going there because he wants to get a job. And then, this shit happens. It's the best chapter in the book by far, in my opinion. It's just sad because it's the opening. But from there on, it continues a year later with the Mercedes killer getting into contact with Hodges, who's now retired, and they start arguing on a website under Debbie's blue umbrella. And so the story plays out. It turns into this cat and mouse game with Hodges now trying to catch the Mercedes killer, and Hartsfield planning his next big murder. This is not a whodunit kind of crime novel, just to make that clear. We know who Brady Hartsfield is very early on, we learn all of his backstory, and this kind of works. I don't think Hartsfield is a very deep villain, but he's a solid one. King makes him very hateable with all the stuff in his past and his very, very weird relationship with his mother. That is all solid enough for a bad guy in a novel like this. Again, it's not new and exciting stuff, it's kind of cliched, but it works well enough. Same with Hodges, who during the course of the novel assembles his own little team, which is his neighbor Jerome Robinson, who I don't want to call him a racist caricature, but because it's not racist in that sense. He's written to be such a perfect and awesome human being that it feels like overcompensation. It's kind of nuts, because he's such a shallow, uninteresting, nothing character. With the only character thing that he has going on that I remember, besides from being extremely strong and good-looking and intelligent and friendly and nice, is that he sometimes does like a minstrel impression, and he calls himself Tyrone Feelgood, and he starts talking like a racist caricature of a black man, which King very much seems to think is funny, but he dials that back very quickly in the next book, because I can only assume if King knows black people, they told him, dude, it's fine, please don't. And for the idiots in the audience, yes, I know how this is supposed to come across, with Jerome joking about like these racial stereotypes and talking like that in a joke, because he's, good enough friends with Hodges that they can joke about this type of stuff. The problem is, while that is realistically how friends with differences would talk to each other and shit on each other in a friendly way, this is written so fucking cringy. No, it really doesn't work. Oh, Jerome also has a dog. This isn't really important, and he's good with computers because he's a young guy. This will become irrelevant very soon, and then he has pretty much nothing left as a character. And the reason it becomes irrelevant is because of the third major character that is in here, Holly Gibney, who gets introduced pretty late in the book. And in this book, as a side character, Holly is fine. She definitely works better than Jerome, who, again, is a nothing character. Holly Gibney is related to the lady whose Mercedes was stolen by Brady Hartsfield and used for the massacre. And she is at least a character because Holly is very shy, she has a very tragic past, she's kind of neurotic and autistic basically, and she's a computer expert and stuff, so Jerome becomes even more irrelevant as the story progresses. But she has at least something going on here, and something of a character arc at the end, because she's teaming up with Hodges and Jerome, and they go against Brady and try to stop his latest evil plan, which is blowing himself up during a concert in like an auditorium full of teenage girls. So, in total, I just want to wrap this up. Mr. Mercedes is a fine novel. It's not great, it's not good. It won the Edgar Allan Poe Award for the best crime novel of the year because Stephen King's name is on it. Because if this was a brand new author, like a no-name guy, I guess this would be published because any trash gets published, but it really just got a boost for being a Stephen King novel and King trying something different. And so you're like, hey, you know what? Good for him. And it's still an entertaining read. The problems with it are cliches, a lot of cliches. If you've ever read a crime novel, you have read Mr. Mercedes. Lame characters, aside from Hodges, who, while somewhat cliche, is interesting and sympathetic enough. We have a cartoony bad guy who is sufficient for this story. We have a very annoying writing style that became very popular around this time, which is like third person present tense, or as I like to call it, screenplay style, which I find annoying. It can work, very much depends on what kind of book and, the author, but it can work. The problem is it doesn't necessarily work here. It's just kind of annoying and distracting, and it takes a while to get into, if you can get into it at all. Because it's very much written like it's supposed to be happening right now. Bill Hodge is standing up and he is walking into the kitchen right now. It's kind of annoying, and I think it's a cheap way to make this feel more urgent and action heavy. Because, it's all happening right now in front of your eyes. And again, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And for some reason, all of these crime novels are written in this style. And then what we also have in here, it's not as strong as it's gonna become later. I mean, kind of, but Stephen King is an old man. Let's get this right out of the way. And because retards are gonna accuse me of being like elderly shaming or whatever, it's fine to be an old man. It's fine that you are not able to write certain things and that you need help and research. But I can still call it out when it's not done well. There is much talk about technology and computers and how a Mercedes works, basically. And yeah, the old man having just learned this information, it shines through in the text, where you can tell King isn't very deep into these topics, and yeah, it just doesn't feel natural in the book. This problem will only get worse with time. And I don't remember if this is present in this one already, but take a shot every time a character is putting his phone on his belt. Which is something I think I've never seen that. I've never seen a human being put a phone on his belt. Was that a thing with like these heavier phones back then, like flip phones and whatever, where you can like put them on your like on the outside? You put that shit in your pocket. This seems like a small nitpick, but it's just one of those little things that keeps happening in Stephen King novels. You should really pay attention to that, because it's in a lot of them. I just noticed it in his latest one, Never Flinch, because I just read that. And that book is set in 2024, and it is so jarring when you notice it. But yeah, sorry, I got sidetracked here. So Mr. Mercedes in total, it's a fine thriller, crime type of novel. For Stephen King, if this was his only attempt at writing like a realistic, with no supernatural stuff, just a detective going against an insane killer in this crime plot, it's good, it's passable, it's decent. It's not gonna change your life or anything, but it's gonna pass a few hours. And I would praise it for being, hey, Stephen King is trying something different. Again, this would be the bonus if this was a standalone, which, by the way, it works as a standalone. There is a little thing at the end that you can call a cliffhanger if you want to, but it works fine if you just read it on its own. But if it was a standalone, I would say all of that it's good and decent. But we have now 8 books, soon to be 9 of them. So yeah, I don't know if I can still give it that. But anyway, this leads us into the next book, Finders Keepers. So when I said earlier that Finders Keepers started as a completely separate, unrelated story that King was working on, I don't know if he said that in an interview, like if he confirmed it, but read the book and you will feel it. Okay, so let me explain how this book is structured. First off, the first book, yeah, that is wrapped up. That storyline, it's not like it continues in these two really directly. We will get back to it. So Finders Keepers begins. The first 200 pages, almost 200 pages, are a completely isolated story. We begin in 1978 with Morris Bellamy, a criminal and a big fan of the author John Rothstein, breaks into Rothstein's house, kills him, and steals a bunch of notebooks, which include, Rothstein's unpublished writing, including new stories about his most famous character, Jimmy Gold, which Bellamy is a big fan of, but he hated the ending of that trilogy, and that made it easier for him to kill Rothstein. So Bellamy steals all of these notebooks, he's dying to read them, but first he has to hide them under a tree, and then he gets arrested for a completely unrelated crime, and is behind bars until modern day. And then in modern day, a teenager named Peter Sorbers, who's living in Bellamy's old house with his family, finds the buried treasure. But then Bellamy is getting released, so obviously the hunt is on. This is a very intriguing premise, and it's King writing about books and readers and writing itself. And as we know, that's one of his strong points. Write what you know, and King knows all about that. Misery is a very good example of that, one of his definitely best books. The problem is, the first almost 200 pages, again, focus on Bellamy and Peter Sorbers, and we intercut every now and then. It jumps between 1978 and then 2010-ish to 2014 when the book came out, and So that works, that's fine. The problem is, once Bill Hodges and the Mr. Mercedes characters come into play, the book completely falls apart and sucks. So we get a bit more of like an arbitrary connection to Mr. Mercedes, because we learn Peter Sorbers' father was one of the victims of the Mercedes killer. Brady Hartsfield from the previous book, and Peter's father is still alive, but he's crippled, and that sucks for the family and stuff. Okay. But then, Bill Hodges comes back in almost halfway through the book when he finally shows up. He has changed his life, because in the last book, obviously, there was a big point that he's like older and fat. And so in this one, he is, he's eating salad instead of burgers, which is an improvement. And he's trying to stay in shape now. And he has opened a detective agency with Holly Gibney, who was also introduced in the last book, called Finders Keepers. So they eventually get caught up in the Peter Sorbers Morris Bellamy affair that's going on. And this sucks. And this is a problem that's gonna go through most of these crime novels by King. He is setting up an interesting enough premise, but then the problem is, we as readers follow our main detective characters for hundreds and hundreds of pages, piecing together the story that we already know. And it sucks. The reason I give Mr. Mercedes a pass and why it works better, there is an actual cat and mouse game going on. And it does create some tension and stuff. That's not the case here. As a reader, I am so frustrated having to read about Hodges and Holly, and Jerome also comes back in here for some reason. Learning all of this about Morris Bellamy, and it's supposed to be like, oh, finally, they discovered who he is, so now they can help Peter. And it's like, I already know who he is. There is no real tension with all of that. I'm just annoyed and bored. And yeah, annoyed is the right word. These characters didn't need to be in this book at all. It would be a stronger book if they weren't. It has a more interesting concept and topic going on, simply because it's King writing about something that he's very passionate about, and you can tell from the writing. And obviously, if you're a big reader, you're also gonna be invested in that topic, with the obsession about literature and writers, and then entitled fans like Bellamy, and then the good type of fans like Peter. That is good stuff. But all of the detective-y stuff in here is so unnecessary. This also kind of creates the problem with Holly Gibney, because in the first book she was a side character, she was quirky and somewhat interesting, at least more so than, Jerome, the token black guy who doesn't really have any character and doesn't even have any use anymore, because Holly is also a computer whiz who can do anything. So yeah. But Holly Gibney, she had her little arc in Mr. Mercedes. She was this kind of like autistic and very frightened elderly woman, really, who had suffered a very painful life and stuff, and that was interesting enough, and you are sympathizing with her enough, and she gets her arc where she, becomes friends with Bill Hodges. He kind of becomes her mentor, and then she is saving the day at the end and going against Brady Hartsfield, the bad guy. So her arc already concluded. Where do you go from here? And in this one, she's joining Hodges, working in this detective agency, Finders Keepers, together. And that's nice. She doesn't really have anything else going on, though. And that's gonna be a thing going forward. I have no fucking idea why King fell in love with this character. out of all the characters he has created, that this is the one. The one who was a solid side character, who had a completed arc, and since then is just the same. And has really nothing going on. I guess we're supposed to think, oh, she's fun and quirky because she knows a lot about movies and is kind of shy about people and, again, kind of autistic. But it's like, no, I need a bit more character than that. Being autistic and kind of quirky and, quoting The Godfather every 5 pages. Yeah, no, I need a bit more character here. But again, Holly doesn't yet stand out as an annoyance, because Hodges and Jerome also stand out as being completely out of place in this book. And speaking of out of place in this book, oh my god, let's get to the last chapter. So while most of the stuff with Hodges and crew sucks, because again, they are researching stuff we already know as the reader, and it's not interesting or suspenseful or anything. The one thing that has been going on there in that plotline, Hodges is visiting Brady Hartsfield in the hospital. After the events of the last book, Brady got brain damaged and is lying in the hospital. He's pretty much a vegetable, but Hodges is convinced, there's something going on still with him. And he has this obsession going on, and that's at least something interesting. And then we get to the end of this book. Again, Mr. Mercedes, completely straight. Realistic, no King-typical supernatural stuff. Finders Keepers. Same, so far. Completely realistic, an interesting topic. Grounded, down to earth. And then we get to the very last chapter where Hodges' fears are confirmed. There is still something going on with Brady Hartsfield. Because in the very last chapter, Brady is using telekinesis to fuck around with stuff in his hospital room. And this is supposed to set up the next book. Oh no, Brady is gonna be back and he has carry powers now. Okay, 2 options. 1, King thinks this is funny and he's fucking with us. 2, he got bored or realized that he's kind of bad at writing realistic crime stories, so he brings in his typical supernatural stuff. It could be a combination of both, that he thinks, this is gonna be fun, and also realizing, this is gonna make it so much easier for me now. I can just write what I know, essentially, which is poorly thought out and poorly explained supernatural stuff happening. Which, don't get me wrong, most of the time King shouldn't explain what's going on with supernatural stuff, because when he explains it, it's usually pretty fucking terrible. But so, let's jump into the 3rd book. End of Watch. Oh my god, where do I even begin with this one? From the cover alone, you can tell something is different here. This book is pretty brain dead. No pun intended, with the main antagonist being considered brain dead. This, oh my god. So the first 2 books, remember how they were realistic and down to earth? This one really isn't, which was already set up with Finders Keepers ending. It goes even more insane than you would imagine. But at the same time, not insane enough to be hilariously bad. You will see what I mean just when I explain to you the basic plot. So Brady Hartsfield completes his arc into becoming a complete cartoon character villain, because so at the end of Mr. Mercedes, he was defeated while he attempted to blow up like an auditorium full of teenage girls. Just because he's crazy and evil and he likes murdering people and stuff. He was fine enough as an antagonist. In this one, he goes full cartoon character. So, he was taken out by Holly Gibney. He got his fucking brain smashed in. And he has been lying in a hospital room for 6 years. Being fed drugs, experimental drugs by his doctor, as we learn in this. And because of that, he has developed telepathic and telekinetic powers. Yes, this is real. And he has been using them for his new master plan, which is, first off, with those powers, he can take control over the minds of people. Like there's a janitor in the hospital, and like his doctor even, he can control them, take over their minds, and essentially use them as like puppets or like avatars running around and essentially leaving his room while leaving his body behind. And he's doing that by hypnotizing them using a fishing video game on a discount Game Boy. It's called the Zap-It, I think. And there's like a fishing game with like a bunch of blue fish, and there's one pink fish you have to catch. Again, look at the cover of the book. And his plan is to use these powers to go into the minds of all these teenagers who escaped his big murder attempt in Mr. Mercedes and get all of them to commit suicide. Because he gets off on that, because he's evil and a villain. And then Bill Hodges and Holly have to investigate what's going on, because there have been a bunch of suicides, all of which seem weirdly related to Brady Hartsfield and the massacre and stuff that was happening back then. And that's the story. And during the course of the novel, they have to learn and accept that, oh yeah, there is supernatural shit happening for real. And then the end fight, which is taking place during like a snowstorm or something, there's the final confrontation with Hodges and Hartsfield, where Brady tries to take over Bill Hodges' body. It's absolute fucking madness. This is one of King's worst books, with all of the supernatural stuff in here feels so been there, done that, with like previous King books. Stuff we've seen already, but now it's shoehorned into a, until this point, realistic crime trilogy, and it's just jarring to read this. Again, Bill Hodges is sympathetic enough. He has another thing going on now, because, again, in the first book he was very overweight, in Finders Keepers then he was trying to stay fit and in shape, and in this one he get the news that he has cancer and he's gonna die. And now there's like, running clock element to the story. And that's fine. Again, Bill Hodges, I think, is a fine enough character. Holly is still stagnant as a character. So is Jerome, who barely has any character. And then the main story is utter madness. Not in a fun way. In the Steve, what the hell were you thinking kind of way. And then this book also establishes something that's gonna be important for the rest of this Holly Gibney saga, which is Jerome has a sister called Barbara, and she is one of the characters that Brady tries to commit suicide. He gets into her mind, and this is fine for this book. She was already in Mr. Mercedes as one of the characters at this concert that Brady was gonna blow up. To add some personal stakes and more tension and stuff, and that was fine. And then in this one it's happening again, and get used to it, because Barbara Robinson, for some fucking reason, being a character in relation to another side character who barely has any character to begin with, for some reason she also becomes important in these later books then. And it's always that she somehow gets into dangerous situations. And it gets really annoying. And it starts with this one, really. So I want to spoil the ending, because who cares? The ending is Bill eventually dies to cancer, but not because of Brady, so on his own terms he goes out, and that's fine. Again, I like Bill Hodges enough as a character. Not one of the greatest, but he's fine. And then Holly inherits the Finders Keepers detective agency, and she's gonna team up with Bill's old police partner. What's his name? See, I can't even remember. I think it's Pete? Again, that's how much of a character he is, which is very funny, because he's around in Mr. Mercedes. And then he's mentioned in this that he's going into retirement, so he's gonna team up with Holly as her partner, and she's the main detective now. We're gonna bring it full circle and leave it open with like the adventure continues type of way. Fine. It's gonna be funny in the next books, because Pete pretty much disappears immediately, it's just fun that you could tell King has no idea what to do with this character, so he wrote him out. But so that is the end of the Bill Hodges trilogy. It started mediocre and it got batshit insane. And I don't know if I would ever recommend this to anyone. I would maybe recommend Mr. Mercedes as a standalone novel and like King's attempt to go into crime fiction, but that's about it. Finders Keepers has like almost half of it is a decent book, and then the rest really isn't. And then End of Watch is madness. It is mad. It's not fun enough. It's like Dreamcatcher. That is a book that is fucking nuts, because King wrote it after his accident when he was pumped full of drugs. So we get stuff like the shit weasels and this weird alien invasion storyline that turns out to be kind of schizophrenia at the end. It's nuts, and that is more fun than End of Watch, where all of the supernatural elements, not only do they feel like well known to King readers who know his stuff, but also really stupid. Like, genuinely fucking stupid. More stupid than a normal supernatural Stephen King thriller would be. Because this is the third book in a realistic crime series. So, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. And then for some reason, King continued writing crime novels, with the next one also having supernatural elements to it. Which at least work better than in End of Watch, but still, it's not a high bar. And for some reason, even though this trilogy wrapped up, and again, this started as a short story, got expanded into one novel, and then expanded into a trilogy almost in name only. And then for some reason, King fell so in love with the side character of Holly Gibney, he has to bring her back. Again and again and again. In his very, very much progressively getting worse crime novel series. But we will talk about that another time, because I'm losing my voice and this has been going on for way too long. Next time on this channel, we're gonna talk about the next couple of Holly Gibney books where she actually starts to become the main character.